Well, social innovation is in its most simple form, is ensuring that we're using the power of the marketplace to address social needs. So our social purpose organization. So it's as simple as the Salvation Army creating a used clothing store to feed into their social purpose. So they're able to generate income to do that. So that's at its simplest level, and there are many much more complex versions of what social innovation is, right up to social impact bonds and being able to look at ways that we can attack some of the most intractable social problems that exist in our society. Well, we have some of the very best social innovators in the world in the lower mainland of British Columbia, and have been leading the way in many, many ways. Alet Mansky, as an example, who started PLAN, he's just back from Europe, where he's been talking about social innovation across Europe. He's going to Australia in the next little while. And we've put together a council of 16 of these creative people in our province, and we need to be able to bring that culture out more broadly. The government needs to take away some of the impediments. We have to make some legislative changes that'll give them more freedom to do the things that they can do. It is the future. Obama's talking about it. Cameron is talking about it in England. Denmark, they're doing some creative things. Australia is doing things. And we in British Columbia are right on the forefront of that. In fact, the Ottawa Citizen recently called the lower mainland of Vancouver the Silicon Valley of social innovation. So social innovation, in terms of getting it ingrained in government so that we can facilitate what's happening in the community, has taken some time. I first pitched it, and we had it in the throne speech in 2005, but it didn't really go very far. So about a year and a half ago, I put together a committee of MLAs. We did a lot of interviewing, and we came up with a number of recommendations with respect to volunteerism and social innovation, presented those to government caucus on 2 occasions, and had our endorsement, received full endorsement for those recommendations, and have moved forward with an action plan around that. And part of that is putting together this Innovation Council of very creative people in British Columbia who are very anxious to look at and work at this. And ultimately it is, how do we make sure we take care, how do we find ways to take care of each other? How do we take care of each other, and how do we take care of our environment? It's about the passion and the compassion that is about living together in a world that's growing and changing. And social innovation is one of the tools, one of the more creative tools that we can use to do that in a time when we don't have the fiscal resources that we want to have to be able to do that. So it gives us a chance to deal with some of those really difficult, intractable problems that we face. And we know culturally how change takes place. We know what we need to do around some of those things. Well, I think, firstly, we can make it flourish much more by government creating the tools for that. So one thing we can do is we can allow there to be a tax write-off when you invest in a social program, just like if you invest in a mine. We need to give it that same type of credibility in terms of our ability to respond to that. We need to create new governance models so we don't impinge upon their ability to function as we do now with the nonprofit society. And we need to create an environment in which there can be all the synergies of people working together to address those. And we need to recognize the potential that exists for social innovation to address those changes. It's about raising consciousness, raising awareness across people. There are people who really understand it, but we don't, that hasn't been ingrained in our society yet. It's like when we realized that there's something called the precognitive notions of things. We didn't know that smoking was a problem for years, and people blithely went on smoking. As awareness grew, we started to see people say, oh, maybe there's something else to do. And then people actually moved into thinking about it and planning and changing. The same things happened with recycling as we've raised consciousness that about wearing seatbelts. Those are major cultural shifts in our understanding. We're on the verge of that with social innovation. We've got those leaders who are out there understanding it, moving it, and we have to be able to continue to raise that. So things like the film festival, bringing out and raising consciousness, that's a great way to convey that information, to raise consciousness, to raise awareness, and show that there are options, there are ways that we can attract these, show that there are problems and challenges and obstacles, but opportunities, great opportunities with this. Well, my thesis area is around the notions of public policy, and how can public policy impact positively the subjective sense of well-being of a populace. What are the things that can be done in a public policy sense to engage a public, to engage people in ways so that they become partners, and it's not doing to but doing with. It's the co-creation of policy in ways that grows and allows it to flourish in meaningful ways. So politicians tend to get judged in Western democracies based on gross domestic product, GDP. And we know in provinces like British Columbia, where we export so many natural resources, that your GDP is all measured on that. So your GDP can be going way up, but the mean income of people can be going way down. So it's not a good reflection. GDP doesn't measure anything that is meaningful and important to people. We don't measure relationships and how they're feeling about each other and all of those things that are important to people. So GDP doesn't measure any of those things. So how do we look at and have policy that actually reflects what people care about? How they care about each other, how they care about the things that they're doing. And we're to the point where we actually have, with new technologies, some abilities to measure that, some abilities to measure the impact and how that's affecting people. So being able to grasp and understand the impact of those types of policies, those types of changes on people with good research that says this makes a difference to how people, to how families, to how they are able to work with each other and how they're able to feel better about who they are and what they're doing. Well, it's an ideal forum for raising that consciousness, to raising that awareness so people get a grasp for what's out there, what the possibilities are for change. It's like when we started recycling and people didn't really understand what that was about. But as consciousness rose, some options were out there. And the film festival provides a way that we've often learned, a way that we can learn with new technologies and films and highlights and using those technologies in a positive way to generate options, to tweak that imagination and that vision that people grab onto and see that things can be different. But they've got to understand that there's an issue. They've got to understand that there's some challenges, and they've got to understand there's tremendous opportunity for change, a tremendous opportunity in our world and in our Lower Mainland and in our Vancouver for really important changes about that important theme of how do we look after each other? How do we care for each other as people, as families, and as individuals, and as in our environment? How do we care for our environment in a compassionate, caring, interacting way? So those things, the film festival starts to highlight those, starts to look at some things that are doing, starts to tweak the imagination. As soon as the vision is tweaked, we can start having the energy that comes behind that to affect the change that comes with understanding that things can be different. But we have to understand what some of the challenges are, and we have to understand what the options are in terms of dealing with that. And certainly the film festival gives us that opportunity. It's another important venue in terms of raising that awareness and consciousness so we can affect and start having change. If your funding model, see, social innovation is about sustainable funding models. So traditionally our social capital has been generated, all of the social good historically has been provided by philanthropists, the very wealthy, by faith-based organizations, churches and synagogues and temples, and by government. And traditionally that's the three sources for social change and social good. So that's the social capital. On the other side we've had the physical capital, the business world that's marketed and built things. There hasn't been much transition between them. And there's a recognition that there's a need for that, the dynamics of each of them. Each of them have their great skills, but how do we blend those skills? How do we tie those together? So an example might be something like a social impact bond, which has not been, it's just starting to experiment a little bit in England, but it's something that we want to get off the ground here. So when I was the Minister of Children and Families, I used to go to Treasury Board and say, we need funding for autistic children. If we can spend $100,000 in the first year of life of an autistic child, we know that they will start functioning age appropriately, and the cost to government will be reduced over the lifetime. And we now actually have the data where we can look back on what an autistic child on average costs for, say, the last 5 years. And as we tie that together, we never know which one, but if your metrics are large enough, if you take 5,000 or 2,000 or 1,000 autistic children, you're going to know on average what that cost will be. So you can go to government and say, these 1,000 autistic children cost government $5 million over the past 5 years, making up a number. So can you give us a contract and we'll take care of them for the next 5 years, and with a 2% increase in it. And then government gives you that contract. But you say to government, things are different. We're not just asking for the provision of services, what's called process evaluation. We'll just provide 50 hours a week or 40 hours a week to this autistic child. We're saying, provide us the contract and we will tell you what the outcomes will be in 5 years. But don't give us any money until we deliver. So we take the risk away from government. Now we go to the money markets. Now we go to Van City Savings or somewhere like that, and they raise the money. And then you take that money and go back to a health authority or to a nonprofit or to an organization that will provide services to those autistic children for those 5 years. And at the end of the 5 years, you go back to government and say, look, government doesn't take any risk. The risk is taken away from the taxpayer, taken away from the public, but the risk sits with the marketplace. The marketplace is really good at dealing with risk and managing it all the time. And then you deliver to government the outcome. And government only pays when they've received it. The taxpayer, the people of our province only pay when they get the results. We don't do that now with social programs. And that's a whole shift to an outcome-based measure. So I might want to invest in autistic children. I might want to invest in recycling. I might want to invest in type 2 diabetes or young offenders. And maybe so I might put my money forward to invest in that, and I would get a return on my money for that. But I also would get, with the tax change we're proposing, a 15% tax credit that you get. So there's some incentive to do that, just as there's the incentive when you invest in a mine. So you take that money and then you use it for social purpose, for social good. And the outcome starts shifting the whole model. So we've done that for years in the business world, but we haven't applied that to the ever-pressing, intractable challenges we have with homelessness, with dealing with all of the challenges we have with young offenders, with autism, with youth who are not ready to start school. So it gives us a whole different way to look at an approach that hasn't been utilized yet. So this legislative change to the Corporate Capital Tax Act, the Venture Capital Act, will allow for us to make that change. So ethical growth funds have become quite popular. People invest in ethical growth. They want to invest in things that they see. So I believe that social growth funds will have that same appeal, that people will want to do it. And there's some interesting models that we're talking about. So if you could get a 4% return on your money, actually in India they've done a little bit of this, and people will invest in it, and they'll say, check off what type of return you want, 4%, 3%, 2%, or no return. And a lot of people are saying, no, I check no return. I want to get the tax write-off, and this is I feel good about my participation in society. This is how I'm giving back. So I don't want a return on my money. I want any money that's earned through that to go back into the social purpose of the organization. And one of the traditional economic theory says that people will do things to get more money, but research, particularly modern research using the functional MRI, tells us that we're far more altruistic than we're ever given credit for. That humans, if you allow them, are really altruistic and giving. It's this development of the capitalist model that has really taken away from that. But the behavioral economists of the past 4 and 5 years are really blowing that out of the water. So the traditional economists are saying that they made a mistake. In fact, Greenspan's famous apology when there was the downfall of the banking system in the United States, he said, I thought the bankers would do what economic theory tells us they would do. They would respond to being rewarded. They didn't. And so traditionally societies, when things go wrong, they create a new rule or a new incentive. And so we create all kinds of new rules, just like they did when the stock market fell in 1929. We created new rules so it'll never happen again. Well, it'll always happen again until we allow there to be practical wisdom, people being able to make decisions that are based on their belief, wanting to do the moral desire to do the right thing, and the moral will to do the right thing, and the moral skill to determine what that right thing is. And if we could take away from all the bureaucracies and the impinging of all of those things and allow people to do things, we'd be way better off. So like teachers, we tell the teachers, here are the things you have to teach, and we don't allow them to make decisions. We don't give them the freedom. And by doing that, we demean the profession and we demean the individual teachers because they've got great creativity. They can be great innovators if we let them.